For years, whispers have followed the royal family conversations that only happened when doors were locked and voices were lowered. But this time, the silence didn't hold. When Zara Tindall finally spoke, it wasn't a slip or a rumor, it was deliberate. What she revealed about a private comment made behind closed doors sent shockwaves through the monarchy. Because this wasn't just gossip. It was about Catherine, and it came from Camilla herself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. In a family trained to perfect silence, the decision to speak is never accidental. Zara understood that better than anyone. Raised in an environment where loyalty was measured by restraint, where unspoken rules mattered more than written ones, she had watched countless moments disappear into private memory. Yet this one refused to fade. What she revealed wasn't dressed up for drama or softened for comfort. It was a raw admission that a line had been crossed in a place where trust was assumed, not negotiated. And once spoken, it immediately changed how insiders viewed everything that came before it. The shock wasn't only about the words themselves, but about who chose to reveal them. Zara had always been considered the safest pair of hands in the room. She wasn't a courtier with ambition, nor a royal chasing relevance. She was family quiet, grounded, and fiercely protective of what stayed behind closed doors. That reputation made her revelation land harder than any leaked memo ever could. If someone like Zara was willing to speak, it meant the moment carried a weight too heavy to ignore. Inside palace circles, off-record conversations are the most dangerous currency of all. They are where real opinions surface, stripped of ceremony and strategy. They are never meant to travel. Zara's account pulled back the curtain on one of those moments, exposing not just a comment, but the emotional undercurrent beneath it. The secrecy that once protected the monarchy suddenly felt fragile, as if one private truth had loosened the foundations holding everything together. What made the revelation even more unsettling was the subject at its center. Catherine had long been portrayed as a stabilizing force, someone who absorbed pressure quietly and presented unity outwardly. To hear that she was discussed differently in private suggested a fracture between image and reality. Zara didn't frame the comment as casual misunderstanding. She framed it as something revealing something that hinted at long-standing tensions, masked by public smiles and formal appearances. Those tensions hadn't appeared overnight. They had simmered through years of shifting roles, growing influence, and silent comparisons. Zara's words suggested that beneath the surface of unity there were unspoken judgments and unresolved resentments. And once that truth surfaced, it couldn't be contained. Because private words, once exposed, take on a life of their own, reshaping trust in ways no public statement can undo. The stakes were instantly clear. This wasn't a scandal that could be managed with timing or distraction. It was personal. It was emotional. And it was irreversible. Zara hadn't just shared a comment, she had exposed a moment that forced the royal family to confront what had been said when they thought no one would ever repeat it. But to understand why Zara's words mattered so much, we have to look at the private role she's played inside the royal family for decades. Zara Tindall was never supposed to be the one to speak. Known as loyal, grounded, and fiercely protective of family privacy, she stayed silent while others leaked, hinted, and denied. That's why this moment mattered. When someone like Zara breaks that silence, it signals something far deeper, something that reached a breaking point behind palace walls and demanded to be exposed. For years, Zara existed on the quiet edge of royal life, close enough to know everything, distant enough to avoid the spotlight. She didn't trade in whispers or cultivate influence through proximity. Instead, she carried herself with a restraint learned early, shaped by a household where discipline was not optional and discretion was non-negotiable. Growing up under Princess Anne's unyielding standard, Zara learned that loyalty meant knowing when not to speak, even when silence weighed heavily. That upbringing didn't just teach her how to endure pressure, it taught her how to recognize when silence itself becomes a betrayal. Inside royal circles, credibility is rare, and it doesn't come from titles or proximity to power. It comes from consistency. Zara never chased relevance, never fueled speculation, never offered herself as a source. That is precisely why her voice carried more weight than any anonymous briefing ever could. When tabloids spoke, they were dismissed. When unnamed insiders hinted, they were doubted. But when Zara spoke, people listened, because she had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Her relationship with Catherine had always been marked by quiet understanding rather than public display. They shared more than family ties. They shared an unspoken awareness of the pressure that comes with being judged constantly, while being expected to remain flawless. Over time, that bond deepened into trust, the kind that doesn't need reassurance, the kind that survives without performance. Zara had watched Catherine absorb scrutiny with grace, seen her shoulder expectations without complaint, and understood the cost of that composure better than most. That understanding became a burden once the private comment was made. What Zara heard lingered, not because it was loud, but because it revealed something she couldn't reconcile with the values she had been raised to protect. The pressure didn't come from outside voices or public outrage. It came from within, from the growing realization that staying silent would mean allowing something deeply unfair to remain unchallenged. Each passing day turned the memory heavier, the silence louder. This wasn't about stirring conflict or choosing sides. It was about a moral line Zara had been taught never to cross. In her world, respect wasn't performative. It was foundational. And when that foundation cracked behind closed doors, pretending it hadn't happened felt like complicity. Speaking up didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. A reluctant act driven not by anger, but by conscience. By the time Zara finally broke her silence, the decision had already cost her sleep, peace, and certainty. She knew what revealing the truth could fracture, but she also knew what ignoring it would erode. Because some moments redefine loyalty, forcing a choice between protecting the institution and protecting the people within it. And that line was crossed during a moment the public was never meant to know existed. It wasn't during a public event. There were no cameras, no aides, no rehearsed smiles. According to Zara, the comment was made casually, almost carelessly. A private moment, dismissed as harmless by the speaker. But those words landed like a blade. Because what Camilla said about Catherine wasn't just criticism, it revealed how she truly saw her. The setting mattered because it stripped away performance. This wasn't a corridor buzzing with staff or a formal gathering weighted by protocol. It was a quiet pocket of time, the kind that invites honesty because it feels safe, the kind where people speak without polishing their thoughts. Zara would later describe it as unremarkable on the surface, so ordinary that it almost escaped notice. That ordinariness is what made it dangerous. When no one is watching, the truth tends to slip out unguarded, and that was exactly what happened here. The words came without ceremony, dropped into the space as if they were obvious, as if agreement was assumed. There was no build-up, no warning. Just an offhand remark that carried more meaning than the speaker likely intended to reveal. Publicly, the tone had always been respectful, even warm. Praise delivered at the right moments. Unity implied through smiles and shared appearances. But privately, the contrast was stark. What was said didn't match the image that had been carefully maintained, and that dissonance was impossible to ignore once it surfaced. Beneath the comment, Zara sensed something unsettled. Not open hostility, but something quieter and more corrosive. A trace of resentment that had been sitting unanswered. A flicker of insecurity sharpened by comparison. Catherine's ease with the public, her growing influence, the way she seemed to embody a future others were still struggling to define for themselves. The remark carried an edge that suggested this wasn't about a single moment, but about a long internal reckoning finally finding its voice. Zara's reaction was immediate, even if she didn't show it. Outwardly, she stayed composed, trained by years of discipline not to react when a reaction would complicate everything. Inwardly, something tightened. She replayed the words as they settled, measuring them against everything she believed about loyalty and respect. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as thoughtless, a fleeting lapse that didn't deserve weight. Another part knew that words spoken so freely often come from a place that has been quietly building for years. That tension stayed with her long after the moment passed. It surfaced in unexpected ways, uninvited and persistent. Each time Catherine appeared publicly, poised and unflinching, Zara remembered the private tone that had contradicted the applause. Each time unity was praised, she felt the unease of knowing what had been said when unity wasn't required to be performed. The comment lingered because it changed how everything else sounded afterward, reframing past interactions in a harsher light. What made it unforgettable wasn't volume or cruelty. It was intimacy. The knowledge that the truth had been shared not because it was meant to hurt, but because it was assumed to be safe to say. That assumption unsettled Zara more than the words themselves, because it exposed a belief that Catherine could be spoken about this way, without consequence. And once that realization took hold, it refused to let go. But the real shock wasn't just what was said, it was why it was said at all. For years, Camilla and Catherine were presented as united, respectful, and aligned. But behind the smiles, another story was unfolding. Zara's account peeled back that polished image and exposed a deeper truth, one shaped by comparison, insecurity, and shifting power. What Camilla said suggested she wasn't just observing Catherine, she was measuring herself against her. Within the monarchy, insecurity doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles quietly, shaped by history, perception, and the constant awareness of who commands the room without trying. Camilla had fought a long, complicated path to legitimacy, one marked by scrutiny that never truly faded. Every appearance carried the weight of past judgment, every acceptance felt conditional. In that environment, confidence becomes fragile, and comparison becomes inevitable. Catherine's presence, effortless, composed, widely admired, wasn't just visible. It was unavoidable. Public admiration followed Catherine naturally, without effort or demand. Crowds responded to her warmth, the press framed her as stability, and the future seemed to bend in her direction without resistance. That kind of influence doesn't need authority to be powerful. It simply exists. And for someone who had spent years fighting to be accepted rather than embraced, that ease could feel unsettling. Zara's account hinted that Camilla wasn't reacting to a single moment, but to a slow realization that admiration was shifting toward someone who represented what came next. Beneath that realization lay an unspoken rivalry, not declared, not confrontational, but quietly persistent. It wasn't personal in the traditional sense. It was symbolic. Tradition versus transition. Survival versus inevitability. Camilla stood for endurance, for having weathered the storm and claimed a place that once seemed impossible. Catherine stood for renewal, for a future already welcomed before it fully arrived. In that contrast, tension grew, not through argument, but through silent comparison. Feeling overshadowed doesn't always come from being diminished. Sometimes it comes from watching someone else rise without resistance. Zara sensed that in the tone of the comment she described. Not bitterness exactly, but something sharper than indifference. A need to define oneself against the person everyone else was celebrating. That need, once spoken aloud, revealed more than intended. It exposed an internal struggle that had never been meant for another listener, let alone for repetition. The power dynamics made it even more delicate. A queen consort and a future queen exist on different timelines, governed by different expectations. One must defend her position, the other grows into hers. That imbalance creates pressure where none is openly acknowledged. Zara understood that pressure instinctively, but understanding didn't make the implications any easier to accept. Because power, when it feels threatened, often speaks in ways it later regrets. As Zara replayed the words, the meaning sharpened. This wasn't casual observation. It was assessment, a weighing of presence, influence, and relevance. And once Zara recognized that, the moment shifted from uncomfortable to alarming. If Catherine was being measured this way in private, it meant the harmony presented in public was far more fragile than anyone realized. It meant fractures were forming quietly, out of sight, where they could deepen without resistance. That realization changed Zara's role from witness to protector. She saw how easily private judgments could harden into lasting attitudes, and how damaging those attitudes could become if left unchallenged. Catherine's strength had always been her composure, but even composure has limits when trust erodes behind closed doors. And once Zara recognized the meaning behind those words, she knew Catherine had to be protected. Zara faced an impossible choice. Speak out and fracture the family, or stay silent, and allow the damage to linger. For someone raised to value discretion above all else, the weight was crushing. But loyalty isn't always about silence. Sometimes, it's about choosing the person who needs protection the most, even if the truth burns everything around it. After the comment was made, Zara carried it quietly, the way she had been taught to carry everything difficult. At first, she told herself it was better left untouched, that reopening it would only deepen wounds no one was prepared to face. She replayed the words in her mind, testing them for meaning, hoping time would dull their edge. It didn't. Instead, they grew heavier, pressing in during moments of calm, intruding when she least expected it. Silence, once a refuge, began to feel like a slow betrayal. Her loyalty pulled her in opposite directions. On one side stood her family, bound by history, blood, and an unspoken agreement to protect the institution at all costs. On the other stood Catherine, someone she respected deeply, someone who had earned her place through resilience rather than entitlement. Zara understood the cost Catherine paid every day to maintain composure, to absorb scrutiny without complaint. Knowing that Catherine was being spoken about differently in private made Zara's loyalty feel less like a shield and more like a test. The secret became an emotional burden she couldn't put down. It sat with her in quiet moments, reshaping conversations, altering how she heard praise and perceived warmth. Each time Catherine smiled publicly, Zara wondered what that smile would look like if the truth were known. Each time unity was emphasized, she felt the tension of knowing it was incomplete. Carrying the secret meant carrying responsibility for its consequences, and that responsibility grew heavier with every passing day. Fear followed close behind. Zara understood exactly what could happen if the truth surfaced. Lines would be drawn, trust would be questioned, relationships that survived decades of pressure could fracture in an instant. She imagined the fallout not in headlines, but in private spaces, the silences at gatherings, the guarded conversations, the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted. The risk wasn't abstract, it was personal, and it terrified her. The moment silence became unacceptable didn't arrive with drama. It came quietly during reflection, when Zara realized that protecting the family by staying quiet meant allowing someone else to be quietly diminished. That realization cut deeper than fear. It reframed loyalty itself, turning it from obedience into responsibility. Speaking out wouldn't fix everything, but staying silent would guarantee nothing ever changed. And for the first time, Zara accepted that preserving peace at any cost was no longer the right choice. She chose truth not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Even as she braced for consequences, she understood that once spoken, the words would reshape everything they touched. The fallout was inevitable, the fractures would surface, but so would clarity. And Zara knew that when the revelation finally reached Catherine, it wouldn't arrive as distant information. It would land with emotional force, altering trust in ways that could never be undone. And when Catherine learned what had been said, the emotional impact was immediate. Catherine has mastered composure, the calm smile, the steady presence. But according to insiders, this revelation cut deeper than most imagined. Hearing what was said behind closed doors shattered a sense of trust she didn't even realize she was still holding on to. And for the first time, her silence spoke louder than any statement ever could. Those closest to her noticed the shift immediately, not dramatic, not outward, but unmistakable. Catherine didn't retreat, yet something in her quiet steadiness hardened. The warmth remained, but it was tempered by caution. Insiders would later describe her reaction as controlled pain, the kind that doesn't seek sympathy because it doesn't believe it's owed. She listened, she absorbed, and then she carried on, even as the weight of private judgment settled into places she had long protected. The betrayal wasn't loud or explosive. It was subtle, cutting precisely because it came from a place she believed was safe. Catherine had navigated scrutiny from the public and press with resilience, understanding that criticism was part of the role. What she hadn't prepared for was being measured in private by someone who stood beside her in public unity. That realization reframed years of interactions, forcing her to question which moments were genuine and which were merely performed. Trust inside the family shifted quietly. Catherine didn't confront. She didn't demand explanations. Instead, she recalibrated. Insiders say she became more selective, more guarded about where she placed emotional confidence. The sense of belonging she had carefully built began to feel conditional, dependent not on her actions, but on perceptions she couldn't control. That awareness carried its own toll, eroding the ease she once brought into private family spaces. In the aftermath, Catherine turned inward, and then toward William. Their conversations were private, deliberate, and deeply personal. She didn't dramatize what she had learned. She didn't need to. The facts were enough. William listened, not interrupting, absorbing the implications the way he always did when something mattered. Those discussions weren't about outrage. They were about boundaries. About what had changed, and what could no longer be assumed. The emotional toll came not from anger, but from disappointment. Being judged in private struck at something fundamental: her belief that effort, loyalty, and restraint mattered. Catherine had given everything to the role without complaint, believing that integrity would speak for itself. Learning otherwise forced her to confront a harsher truth, that success doesn't always protect you from resentment, and grace doesn't guarantee goodwill. Still, she didn't break. If anything, the revelation sharpened her resolve. She remained present, committed, and composed, but insiders sensed a new distance, a protective layer that hadn't been there before. It wasn't coldness, it was self-preservation. A quiet acknowledgement that trust, once fractured, never fully returns to its original shape. What this meant for the family lingered unanswered. Relationships built on unspoken understanding now carried the weight of unspoken doubt. Catherine's silence became intentional, no longer just a reflection of strength, but a signal that something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. And while she carried that shift with dignity, its consequences were already beginning to ripple outward, touching others in ways that could not be contained. But Catherine wasn't the only one affected by Zara's revelation. William didn't explode. He didn't confront. He did something far more dangerous, he remembered. Zara's words reframed years of interactions, smiles, and silences. And from that moment on, something shifted. Because when William draws a line, it isn't loud, but it's permanent. The reaction came quietly, almost imperceptibly, but it carried weight. William listened as the truth settled, not interrupting, not rushing to judgment. His expression didn't change, yet everything beneath it did. Those who know him understood the warning signs. Anger, for William, doesn't arrive in bursts. It arrives as focus, as resolve, as a recalibration of loyalty that once given is rarely reversed. Zara's account didn't provoke outrage, it provoked memory. And memory, in his hands, became a ledger. His first instinct was protection. Not dramatic, not performative, but absolute. Catherine had already borne more scrutiny than most could imagine, and the idea that she had been weighed and diminished in private hardened something in him. He didn't need to ask how it felt. He already knew. He had watched her carry pressure with grace, believing trust was mutual. That belief, now shaken, became something he was determined to shield her from again. With that determination came reinterpretation. Moments once dismissed as harmless took on new meaning. Polite exchanges. Careful praise. Long pauses where warmth should have been. William began to see patterns he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before. It wasn't paranoia, it was clarity. Zara's words acted like a lens, bringing sharp focus to things that had always existed at the edges of his awareness. And once seen, they couldn't be unseen. The distance that followed wasn't announced. It didn't need to be. William adjusted his proximity, his trust, his expectations. Conversations remained civil, but the ease was gone. Where there had once been assumption, there was now calculation. Where there had been openness, there was restraint. Those changes were subtle enough to escape public notice, yet profound enough to alter the internal balance of the family. Inside royal dynamics, such shifts are seismic. Authority doesn't need to be asserted when it is already understood. William's withdrawal spoke volumes to those paying attention. Schedules aligned differently. Decisions carried new considerations. Lines of communication narrowed, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Protection, in this context, meant control over access, over information, over emotional exposure. Foreshadowing hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. William didn't seek confrontation, but he didn't forget either. Reckonings don't always arrive as explosions. Sometimes they unfold slowly, through choices that accumulate until outcomes become inevitable. Those closest to him sensed it. The future would not be shaped by this moment alone. but this moment would be remembered when decisions were made. As whispers spread quietly within royal circles, the tremor became impossible to ignore. What had begun as a private revelation now influenced posture, tone, and trust at the highest levels. Nothing outwardly changed, yet everything underneath had. Because when William draws a line, history has shown it doesn't fade, it waits. And as word quietly spread inside royal circles, the monarchy itself felt the tremor. The palace never issued a statement, but the reaction was unmistakable. Meetings happened behind closed doors. Schedules shifted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Zara's revelation didn't just expose a comment, it exposed a vulnerability the monarchy wasn't prepared to manage. And once the truth existed, control became impossible. Inside the palace, response moved quickly but quietly, the way it always does when uncertainty threatens stability. Senior aides convened without ceremony, voices lowered, agendas rewritten on the fly. There was no unified script because there was no precedent for this kind of breach. What unsettled them most wasn't the potential for scandal, it was the realization that something deeply personal had escaped the boundaries meant to contain it. When trust fractures internally, protocol offers little protection. Containment became the immediate priority. Not denial, not confrontation, but insulation. Conversations were shortened. Access narrowed. Decisions that once flowed easily now passed through extra layers of caution. The goal wasn't to erase what had happened that was no longer possible, but to prevent it from reshaping everything else. Emotional fallout, however, doesn't respect hierarchy. It moves through corridors silently, carried by glances, pauses, and the sudden absence of ease. Staff noticed. They always do. Whispers spread in fragments, incomplete yet charged. People spoke carefully, aware that walls listen even when doors are closed. Long-serving aides sensed the shift most acutely. They had seen crises before, but this felt different. It wasn't about policy or public perception. It was about relationships at the core, and those are far harder to repair once strained. Every hushed exchange reinforced the sense that something fundamental had changed. Fear of exposure hovered constantly, not as panic, but as vigilance. The monarchy has survived storms by controlling narrative, but this wasn't a story that could be shaped without consequence. Any misstep risked amplifying the very vulnerability they were trying to suppress. The truth had already altered internal dynamics. Public awareness would only accelerate the damage. That fear didn't lead to chaos, it led to paralysis, a careful stillness that betrayed anxiety beneath the surface. Long-term trust suffered quietly. When people begin to question what is said in private, collaboration becomes cautious. Loyalty becomes conditional. Even routine interactions carried an edge, as if everyone was measuring words for unintended meaning. The fade remained intact, polished and professional, but behind it, cracks widened. Not enough to collapse the structure, but enough to weaken it in ways that would be felt for years. What made this moment dangerous was its subtlety. There was no single action to address, no document to retract, no statement to clarify. The damage was relational, emotional, and therefore resistant to management. Zara's revelation had shifted how power moved, how trust was extended, and how silence was valued. The monarchy could absorb many things, but uncertainty about its own internal bonds posed a unique threat. As days passed, the immediate tension eased, but the consequences settled in. Strategies adapted, relationships recalibrated. The palace returned to outward normalcy, yet nothing underneath felt the same. Control had given way to caution, and caution to distance. Because once silence is broken, it can never be fully restored. This wasn't just about a comment. It was about how power speaks when it thinks no one is listening. Zara's revelation changed how the royal family sees itself and how it protects its future. Because once the truth escapes closed doors, it reshapes loyalty, hierarchy, and trust in ways that can never be undone. The impact of Zara speaking out continues to ripple quietly, long after the initial shock faded. What began as a single moment of honesty has become a reference point, a before and after line that insiders now measure everything against. Silence no longer feels neutral, it feels intentional. And every quiet decision now carries the weight of knowing how easily private words can surface and redefine relationships that once felt unshakable. For Catherine, the shift has been subtle but profound. Her position within the family hasn't weakened, it has clarified. She is no longer just the steady presence absorbing pressure, she has become the quiet center around which loyalty is recalibrated. Respect for her hasn't diminished. It has sharpened. Yet with that clarity comes distance, an emotional boundary drawn not out of resentment, but self-preservation. The ease she once offered freely is now measured, given with intention rather than assumption. Behind the scenes, Camilla's standing has changed in ways no announcement could ever capture. Public roles remain intact, but private perception is harder to control. Words once spoken without caution are now remembered with precision. Interactions are weighed more carefully. Trust, once presumed, now requires maintenance. This isn't punishment, it's consequence. And in an institution built on continuity, even small shifts in perception can carry lasting influence. The future of internal royal relationships now feels less certain, more conditional. Bonds that relied on tradition alone are being tested by awareness. Loyalty is no longer defined solely by silence, but by responsibility. That evolution may strengthen some connections while quietly loosening others. The family will move forward as it always does, but not unchanged. Something essential has been exposed, and exposure leaves marks even when wounds appear healed. The true cost of private words made public is not scandal, it's transformation. It's the loss of innocence within power itself. The realization that what is said in confidence can become history, shaping narratives far beyond its original intent. Zara's choice didn't just reveal a truth, it forced the monarchy to confront how fragile its internal trust can be when honesty collides with hierarchy. What comes next remains unresolved. No dramatic reckoning. No final confrontation. Just a future shaped by memory, caution, and a deeper understanding of how easily balance can shift. In a family where silence has long been currency, its value has changed. And in that change lies both risk and reckoning. And in a family built on silence, this may be the truth that echoes the longest. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one. R9.